David Chen knew what it felt like to be powerless. The aircraft maintenance technician working double shifts just to cover his daughter's medical bills, watching his 8-year-old Emma grow weaker, while insurance companies found new ways to deny coverage. When his request for emergency sick leave was rejected by CEO Victoria Sterling, the same woman whose $8 million Gulfstream G650 sat grounded at the corporate hangar, everyone at Pinnacle Aviation thought it was just another example of corporate cruelty. But they were all wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. While the world's best aviation engineers declared Sterling's custom jet unfixable after a catastrophic electrical failure, David discovered something in the aircraft's complex systems that would change everything. Hidden within the maze of wiring and advanced avionics was a problem so unique, so technically challenging, that only someone with his specific combination of skills and desperate motivation could solve it. The repair would make him invaluable overnight, but it would also reveal a truth about Victoria Sterling that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. What David uncovers about the CEO's hidden past will leave you speechless. The fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Aviation's maintenance hangar cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as David Chen checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. 7:30 in the morning, and he was already on his second cup of coffee, the bitter taste mixing with the metallic aftertaste of worry that had become his constant companion over the past 6 months. Through the massive hangar doors, he could see the sleek silhouette of Victoria Sterling's Gulfstream G650, its pristine white fuselage gleaming despite being grounded for the past 3 weeks. The aircraft represented everything David couldn't afford: luxury, power, the kind of wealth that treated $8 million like pocket change. His own daughter's medical treatments cost more than his annual salary, yet Sterling probably spent more on a single business dinner than David made in a month. At 42, David carried himself with the precise movements of someone who'd spent 20 years working with machinery that demanded perfection. His hands bore the calluses and small scars that came from handling tools in tight spaces, and his eyes held the kind of focus that could spot a loose connection from across a crowded workshop. He'd started as an apprentice straight out of technical college, working his way up through commercial airlines before landing at Pinnacle Aviation 5 years ago. The job at Pinnacle had seemed like a blessing then. Better pay than the airlines, more interesting aircraft, and the opportunity to work on some of the most advanced private jets in the world. David had been proud to tell Emma about the incredible machines he maintained, describing how they could fly faster and higher than any commercial airliner, carrying their wealthy passengers across continents in unprecedented comfort. But that was before Emma's diagnosis. Before the endless series of doctor visits, specialist consultations, and treatment options that their insurance company seemed determined to avoid covering. Before David found himself choosing between paying for his daughter's medication and keeping the electricity on in their small apartment. "Chen!" The sharp voice of Marcus Webb, the hangar supervisor, cut through David's thoughts. Webb was a thin man in his 50s, with the kind of perpetual scowl that suggested he'd given up on finding joy in anything years ago. He approached David's workstation carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "We need to talk," Webb said, gesturing toward his office at the far end of the hangar. David followed, his stomach already clenching with anticipation. In his experience, private conversations with supervisors rarely led to good outcomes. Webb's office was a cramped space cluttered with maintenance manuals, parts catalogs, and the accumulated paperwork of someone who'd been managing aircraft repairs for decades. The walls were covered with certificates and photographs of various aircraft, but David noticed there were no personal photos, no evidence of a life beyond the hangar. "I got your request for emergency leave," Webb said without preamble, settling behind his desk and opening a folder. 3 weeks to take care of your daughter's medical situation." David nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Emma needs surgery, and there are complications with the insurance approval. I need to be there to navigate the paperwork, make sure she gets the treatment she needs." Webb leaned back in his chair, studying David with the kind of expression mechanics used when evaluating a particularly problematic repair. "I understand your situation is difficult, but we're short-staffed as it is. Peterson is out with his back injury, Williams just gave his notice, and we've got 6 aircraft scheduled for major maintenance over the next month." "I've already arranged for Miguel to cover most of my assignments," David said quickly. Miguel Santos was one of the younger technicians, eager to learn and capable of handling routine maintenance tasks. And I can work evenings when I'm not at the hospital. It's not that simple. Webb pulled out another document, this one bearing the Pinnacle Aviation logo and what appeared to be an official letterhead. The request has to go through corporate approval for anything over 5 days. And given our current workload and your performance review from last quarter, David felt his heart sink. His performance review had been affected by the days he'd missed when Emma's condition had worsened, the times he'd had to leave early for doctor appointments, the occasions when exhaustion and stress had made him less than perfectly focused on his work. The request has been denied, Webb continued, his voice carrying what might have been genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, David. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Denied? David stared at the document, seeing his daughter's future dissolving in corporate bureaucracy. Marcus, my 8-year-old daughter needs surgery. This isn't a vacation request. This is about her life. I understand that, and I wish I could help. But the decision came from the top. Victoria Sterling herself reviewed the request and decided that operational needs take priority. Webb set down the paperwork and looked directly at David. You're a good technician, Chen. One of the best we've got. But the company has obligations to its clients, and those clients expect their aircraft to be available when needed. David thought about Victoria Sterling, the 38-year-old CEO who'd inherited Pinnacle Aviation from her father and transformed it into one of the most successful private aviation companies on the East Coast. He'd seen her occasionally, usually from a distance, stepping out of her personal Gulfstream wearing expensive suits, and the kind of confident expression that came from never having to worry about money. Sterling had a reputation for being brilliant but ruthless, someone who could analyze complex business situations with surgical precision, while showing little concern for the human cost of her decisions. She'd doubled Pinnacle's revenue in 5 years through aggressive expansion and cost-cutting measures that had eliminated dozens of jobs while increasing workloads for those who remained. What if I take unpaid leave? David asked, desperately. I don't need the salary if it means I can be with Emma during her treatment. Webb shook his head. The decision is final. You can take up to 5 days of sick leave, but anything beyond that risks your employment. I'm sorry, David. I really am. David left Webb's office feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. He walked through the hangar in a daze, barely acknowledging the greetings of his coworkers. At his workstation, he stared at the tools that had been his livelihood for 2 decades, wondering how he was supposed to choose between his job and his daughter's health. Miguel Santos approached cautiously, his young face showing concern. At 26, Miguel had the enthusiasm of someone still excited about working on sophisticated aircraft, but he also had the intelligence to read workplace dynamics. Everything okay, David? Sterling denied my leave request, David said quietly, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he spoke louder. 3 weeks to help Emma through surgery, and she decided operational needs are more important. Miguel's expression darkened. Like most of the technicians, he'd developed a healthy resentment toward Sterling's management style. That's cold, even for her. What are you going to do? David didn't have an answer. He'd exhausted his savings on medical bills, maxed out credit cards to pay for Emma's medications, and even borrowed money from his elderly parents who lived on Social Security. Taking unpaid leave would mean losing his health insurance exactly when Emma needed it most, but staying at work while she underwent surgery felt like abandoning her when she needed him most. The morning passed in a blur of routine maintenance tasks. David found himself going through the motions of his job while his mind churned through impossible choices. Replace the fuel pump on a Citation X. Check the avionics systems on a Falcon 900. Inspect the landing gear on a Learjet 75. Each task performed with the automatic precision of someone who'd done them thousands of times, while internally, he wrestled with a problem that had no good solution. It was just after lunch when the emergency call came in. Victoria Sterling's Gulfstream G650, the crown jewel of Pinnacle Aviation's fleet, had suffered a catastrophic electrical failure during a routine pre-flight check. The aircraft's entire avionics system had gone dark, followed by a series of electrical surges that had apparently damaged multiple systems throughout the plane. David watched from across the hangar as Sterling's pilot, Captain James Rodriguez, consulted with Webb and several other supervisors. Rodriguez was a veteran pilot with 30 years of experience flying everything from military jets to corporate aircraft, and David had never seen him look as concerned as he did now. "Complete electrical failure," Rodriguez was saying as David moved close enough to overhear. "Everything went dead at once. Then we had surges that triggered every circuit breaker in the aircraft. I've never seen anything like it." Webb nodded grimly. "We'll get our best people on it immediately. David, this is your area of expertise. What do you think we're looking at?" David approached the Gulfstream with the methodical caution of a surgeon approaching a critical patient. The G650 was one of the most advanced business jets ever built, packed with sophisticated avionics and flight management systems that cost more than most people's houses. Its electrical systems were incredibly complex, with multiple redundant pathways designed to prevent exactly the kind of failure that had apparently occurred. "I'll need to run a complete diagnostic," David said, already mentally cataloging the tools and test equipment he'd need. This kind of total system failure usually indicates a problem with the main electrical distribution panel, or possibly a fault in the aircraft's power generation system. He spent the next hour conducting preliminary tests, connecting diagnostic equipment to various access points throughout the aircraft. What he found made no sense. The main electrical distribution panel showed normal readings. The generators were functioning perfectly. The backup battery systems were fully charged and operational. Yet somehow, the aircraft's avionics remained completely dead. "Any ideas?" Webb asked, appearing beside David as he stared at a computer screen full of diagnostic data that contradicted everything he was seeing with his own eyes. "This shouldn't be possible," David admitted. "According to every test I've run, all the electrical systems are functioning normally. But clearly, something is preventing power from reaching the avionics bay." Word of the Gulfstream's mysterious failure spread quickly through the aviation community. By the end of the week, 3 different teams of specialists had examined the aircraft, each reaching the same conclusion. The electrical failure was unprecedented and potentially unfixable. Harrison Aerospace, the company that had originally installed the aircraft's custom avionics package, sent their best technicians. They spent 2 days running tests and consulting technical manuals before declaring that the aircraft would need to be completely rewired, a process that would take months and cost nearly $2 million. Boeing's service team, called in as a last resort, conducted their own analysis using equipment that David had never seen before. Their conclusion was even more pessimistic. The electrical failure had apparently damaged the aircraft's central computer systems in ways that made repair economically unfeasible. They recommended that Sterling consider the aircraft a total loss. David watched these expert teams come and go, each one bringing sophisticated equipment and decades of collective experience. Each one leaving with the same verdict: impossible to fix. He found himself studying their reports during his lunch breaks, trying to understand how an aircraft that showed normal electrical readings could remain completely inoperative. It was during one of these lunch break study sessions that Emma called. David's daughter had his old smartphone, and she called him every day during her lunch period at school to tell him about her classes and ask about the airplanes he was working on. These conversations had become the highlight of David's day, the one bright spot in an increasingly difficult situation. "Hi, Daddy." Emma's voice was weaker than usual, and David felt his chest tighten with worry. "How are the airplanes today?" "There's one that's giving us trouble," David said, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "The fanciest plane in our hangar, and we can't figure out what's wrong with it." "What kind of trouble?" Emma had inherited David's curiosity about how things worked, and despite her illness, she remained fascinated by the technical challenges he faced at work. David found himself describing the Gulfstream's electrical problems in simplified terms, explaining how electricity flowed through aircraft systems like water through pipes, and how sometimes blockages could occur in unexpected places. As he talked, he realized that explaining the problem to his 8-year-old daughter was helping him think about it differently. "Maybe the problem isn't where everyone is looking," Emma suggested with the kind of innocent insight that sometimes cuts straight to the heart of complex issues. "Maybe it's hiding somewhere nobody thinks to check." After ending the call, David sat in the break room staring at the technical reports scattered across the table. Emma's words echoed in his mind. maybe the problem was hiding somewhere nobody thinks to check. Every expert team had focused on the main electrical systems, running the same tests and reaching the same conclusions. But what if they were all looking in the wrong place? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That evening, after the hangar had emptied and David was supposed to be heading home, he found himself back at the Gulfstream with a flashlight and his basic toolkit. He'd received permission to work on the aircraft during off hours, partly because Webb wanted to give him something to focus on besides his denied leave request, and partly because David's reputation for solving unusual problems made him worth consulting. David climbed into the aircraft's cabin, noting the luxurious leather seats and polished wood trim that represented a level of wealth he could barely comprehend. The passenger area was configured for long-distance travel, with reclining seats that converted to beds, a full galley, and entertainment systems that probably cost more than David's annual salary. But David wasn't interested in the luxury appointments. He was focused on something the other technical teams had overlooked: the aircraft's custom modifications. According to the maintenance records, Sterling had commissioned several specialized installations when she'd purchased the Gulfstream 3 years ago. Most were standard executive modifications: upgraded communications equipment, enhanced security systems, additional power outlets for business equipment. However, one modification caught David's attention: a custom environmental control system that had been installed by a company called Arctic Solutions. The system was designed to maintain precise temperature and humidity levels in a special cargo compartment, the kind of installation typically used for transporting sensitive equipment or biological samples. David made his way to the rear of the aircraft, where the special cargo compartment was located. The space was small, about the size of a large suitcase, and was accessible through a panel that blended seamlessly with the cabin's interior design. Most people would never notice it was there. When David opened the panel, he found something that made his pulse quicken. The cargo compartment contained what appeared to be a portable medical laboratory, complete with refrigerated storage units, diagnostic equipment, and monitoring devices. The setup was incredibly sophisticated, far beyond anything David had seen in civilian aircraft. More importantly, the medical equipment was connected to the aircraft's electrical system through a series of custom power connections that bypassed the main distribution panel entirely. These connections weren't mentioned in any of the technical documentation that the expert teams had reviewed. David traced the power cables with his flashlight, following them through the aircraft's interior structure. The routing was complex and ingenious, designed to provide uninterrupted power to the medical equipment even if the aircraft's main electrical systems failed. But the installation had created something the original designers hadn't anticipated: an electromagnetic interference pattern that could disrupt the aircraft's avionics systems under specific conditions. The more David studied the installation, the more he understood what had happened. The medical equipment's power draw, combined with its electromagnetic signature, had created a resonance frequency that interfered with the aircraft's flight management computers. The interference wasn't constant. It only occurred when the medical equipment was operating in a specific diagnostic mode, which explained why the problem had been intermittent and difficult to reproduce. David spent the next 2 hours documenting his findings, taking photographs and making detailed notes about the power routing and interference patterns. By the time he finished, he was certain he'd found the source of the electrical failure. More importantly, he knew exactly how to fix it. The solution would require rerouting several power connections and installing additional shielding around the medical equipment. It was complex work that would take several days to complete, but it was definitely achievable with the right tools and expertise. David estimated that the repair would cost less than $50,000, a fraction of what the expert teams had quoted. But as David prepared to leave the aircraft, he found himself wondering about the medical equipment hidden in the cargo compartment. Why would Victoria Sterling need a portable laboratory in her private jet? What kind of medical work required the ability to transport sensitive biological samples at precisely controlled temperatures? The questions nagged at David as he drove home through the empty streets of Hartford, Connecticut. Pinnacle Aviation was located just outside the city, in an industrial area that had seen better days. David's apartment was in a working-class neighborhood where most of his neighbors were struggling with the same kinds of financial pressures that kept him awake at night. Emma was asleep when he arrived home, but David's elderly babysitter, Mrs. Patterson, was waiting with a cup of coffee and the kind of concerned expression that meant she had something important to discuss. "Emma had a difficult day," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, settling into David's worn couch. She was more tired than usual, and she didn't eat much dinner. I think the stress of waiting for surgery approval is affecting her more than she's letting on. David felt guilt wash over him like a cold wave. While he'd been solving technical puzzles in a millionaire's private jet, his daughter had been struggling with fear and uncertainty about her future. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd potentially solved Victoria Sterling's aircraft problem in a few hours, while Sterling had dismissed his daughter's medical crisis with barely a moment's consideration. The insurance company called again, Mrs. Patterson continued. They need more documentation from Emma's doctor before they'll approve the surgery. Something about pre-authorization for the specialized equipment they want to use. David rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar headache that came with navigating the healthcare bureaucracy. Emma's condition required a surgical procedure that was still considered experimental, which made insurance approval nearly impossible. The hospital had agreed to perform the surgery if David could guarantee payment, but that would require him to mortgage his apartment and probably declare bankruptcy afterward. "There's something else," Mrs. Patterson said hesitantly. "Emma asked me to help her write a letter. She wants to send it to your boss, to ask if you can have time off to be with her during the surgery." David's throat tightened. The idea of his 8-year-old daughter writing to Victoria Sterling, pleading for her father to be allowed time off during her medical crisis, was almost unbearable. It highlighted everything that was wrong with a system that valued corporate profits over human need. "I'll talk to her about it tomorrow," David said, though he had no idea what he would say. How do you explain to a child that some people have more power than others, and that sometimes those people make decisions that seem cruel and arbitrary? The next morning, David arrived at the hangar early, carrying a detailed report of his findings about the Gulfstream's electrical problems. He'd spent most of the night refining his analysis, double-checking his calculations, and preparing a repair plan that addressed every aspect of the interference issue. Webb was in his office reviewing the latest status reports from the various expert teams when David knocked on his door. The supervisor looked up with the weary expression of someone who'd been fielding increasingly frustrated calls from Victoria Sterling about her grounded aircraft. "Please tell me you have some good news," Webb said, gesturing for David to sit down. "Sterling is getting pressure from her board of directors. The Gulfstream is supposed to be in Geneva next week for some kind of important meeting, and she's not happy about having to use commercial flights." David spread his photographs and technical drawings across Webb's desk. "I found the problem. It's not in the main electrical system. It's in a custom modification that's creating electromagnetic interference with the avionics." Webb studied the documentation with growing interest. As a supervisor, he understood aircraft systems well enough to recognize that David's analysis was both thorough and technically sound. "You're saying the other teams missed this because they weren't looking at the custom installations?" "Exactly. The medical equipment in the cargo compartment is connected through bypassed power routing that creates interference patterns. I can fix it, but I'll need access to some specialized tools and about a week of dedicated work time." Webb leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. If David was right, Pinnacle Aviation could repair the aircraft for a fraction of what the expert teams had quoted, saving the company millions of dollars while restoring Sterling's confidence in their capabilities. "This is incredible work, David. Really exceptional. But given your current situation with the leave request, I'm not sure how to proceed." David had been thinking about exactly that issue. His discovery represented significant value to Pinnacle Aviation, but he was still the employee whose family emergency had been dismissed as less important than operational needs. The contradiction highlighted everything that was wrong with their working relationship. "I have a proposal," David said carefully. "I'll complete the repair work on my own time, evenings and weekends, so it doesn't interfere with my regular duties. In exchange, I'd like you to reconsider my leave request." Webb was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating the potential consequences of such an arrangement. If David's repair succeeded, it would make Pinnacle Aviation look brilliant while saving the company an enormous amount of money. If it failed, the responsibility would fall primarily on David rather than the company's management. "I can't make that decision myself," Webb said finally. "This would need to come from Sterling directly. But given what you've discovered, I think she'll be very interested in hearing your proposal." The meeting with Victoria Sterling was scheduled for that afternoon in her executive office on the second floor of Pinnacle Aviation's administrative building. David had never been in the executive suite before, and he was struck by the contrast with the practical functionality of the maintenance hangar. Sterling's office was elegant and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a view of the company's aircraft fleet and polished furniture that probably cost more than David's annual salary. Victoria Sterling herself was younger than David had expected, with shoulder-length dark hair and the kind of precise bearing that suggested military training or high-level corporate experience. She was reviewing David's technical report when he entered, her expression focused and analytical. "Mr. Chen," she said, without looking up from the documents, "your supervisor tells me you believe you can repair my aircraft when 3 teams of experts have declared it unfixable." "Yes, ma'am. The problem is electromagnetic interference from the custom medical equipment installation. I can eliminate the interference by rerouting power connections and adding appropriate shielding." Sterling finally looked up, studying David with the kind of intense attention that made him understand why she'd been successful in business. Her eyes were intelligent and calculating, but there was something else there, a hint of curiosity or perhaps surprise. "The medical equipment," she said slowly. "You examined the cargo compartment installation." "Yes, ma'am. The power routing for that system is what's causing the interference pattern. It's actually a very sophisticated setup. I've never seen anything like it in a civilian aircraft." For a moment, Sterling's professional composure seemed to slip slightly. David caught a glimpse of something that might have been vulnerability or concern, though it disappeared so quickly he wondered if he'd imagined it. "Mr. Chen, that equipment serves a very specific and private purpose. I trust that your examination of it will remain confidential." "Of course. I'm only concerned with the technical aspects that affect the aircraft's electrical systems." Sterling nodded, apparently satisfied with his response. "Your supervisor mentioned that you're willing to complete this repair on your own time in exchange for some kind of accommodation regarding a leave request." David felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment that would determine whether Emma would have her father beside her during the most frightening experience of her young life. "My 8-year-old daughter needs surgery, and there are complications with insurance approval that require my personal attention. I've requested 3 weeks of leave to help her through the medical process, but the request was denied due to operational needs." I remember that request. Emergency leave during our busiest maintenance period would have created significant scheduling difficulties. David struggled to keep his voice level. "I understand the operational challenges, but my daughter's health is the most important thing in my life. If I can solve your aircraft's problem, something that no one else has been able to do, I'd like to think that demonstrates value to the company." Sterling was quiet for a long moment, and David could almost see her weighing the various factors involved in her decision. The repair of her aircraft was obviously important, both for practical and financial reasons, but approving his leave request would set a precedent that might complicate future personnel decisions. "Your proposed repair," she said finally. "How confident are you that it will succeed?" "Very confident. I've identified the exact source of the interference and developed a specific solution. The work is complex, but definitely achievable. And if you're wrong, if your repair attempt fails or causes additional damage to the aircraft." David had considered that possibility extensively. Aircraft repair carried inherent risks, and working on an $8 million jet amplified those risks considerably. But he'd never been more certain about a technical diagnosis in his career. "If my repair fails, I'll accept full responsibility. But I don't believe that will happen." Sterling stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her grounded Gulfstream. David could see her mind working, analyzing the situation from multiple angles. When she turned back to face him, her expression had changed slightly, still professional, but with a hint of something that might have been respect. "Very well, Mr. Chen. You have a deal. Complete the repair successfully, and I'll approve your leave request. But I want daily progress reports, and if there are any complications, I expect to be informed immediately." David felt relief flood through him like warm water. Emma would have her father beside her during her surgery, and he would have the chance to prove that his technical skills were worth more than the company's initial assessment had suggested. "Thank you, Miss Sterling. I won't let you down." As David left Sterling's office, he found himself wondering about the medical equipment hidden in her aircraft's cargo compartment. The setup was far too sophisticated for personal use. It looked more like the kind of mobile laboratory that might be used for medical research or emergency response. But Sterling's request for confidentiality made it clear that whatever she was using it for, she didn't want it discussed. The next week became a blur of intensive technical work. David spent his days handling routine maintenance tasks and his evenings working on the Gulfstream's electrical systems. The repair was even more complex than he'd initially estimated, requiring him to access wiring that ran through virtually every section of the aircraft. Miguel Santos volunteered to help during his off hours, fascinated by the technical challenge and eager to learn advanced troubleshooting techniques. Together, they carefully rerouted power connections, installed electromagnetic shielding, and tested each modification to ensure it didn't create new problems. "This is incredible work," Miguel said as they completed the installation of new shielding around the medical equipment. "I've never seen interference patterns this complex. How did you figure out what was causing it?" David smiled, thinking about Emma's innocent suggestion that maybe the problem was hiding somewhere nobody thought to check. Sometimes you have to look at things differently. The other teams were focused on the main electrical systems because that's where problems usually occur. But this aircraft has custom modifications that created a unique situation. By the end of the week, David was confident that he'd eliminated the electromagnetic interference that had been disabling the aircraft's avionics. The final test would come when they attempted to power up the flight management systems and verify that all functions were operational. Captain Rodriguez joined them for the test, his expression skeptical but hopeful. The veteran pilot had been flying Sterling's aircraft for 3 years, and the electrical failure had been as frustrating for him as it had been for the maintenance teams. "Let's see what you've accomplished," Rodriguez said, settling into the pilot's seat and beginning the standard startup sequence. David held his breath as the aircraft's systems came online one by one. The main electrical panel showed normal readings. The backup systems verified proper operation. And then, for the first time in 3 weeks, the flight management computers initialized successfully, their displays showing the familiar constellation of navigation data and system status indicators. "I'll be damned," Rodriguez whispered, running through a complete systems check. "Everything's working perfectly. How did you solve a problem that stumped teams of experts?" David felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. His diagnosis had been correct, his repair plan had worked, and Sterling's aircraft was fully operational again. More importantly, he'd earned the leave time that would allow him to be with Emma during her surgery. The news of David's successful repair spread quickly through Pinnacle Aviation. Webb congratulated him personally, and several other technicians stopped by to examine his work and understand his problem-solving approach. For the first time since Emma's diagnosis, David felt like he was in control of his situation, rather than being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his influence. Victoria Sterling's response was characteristically direct. She approved his 3-week leave request immediately and authorized a substantial bonus payment for solving the aircraft's problems. But she also requested a private meeting to discuss what David had observed during his work on the medical equipment installation. "Mr. Chen," she said when they met in her office the following Monday, "your discretion regarding the specialized equipment in my aircraft has been noted and appreciated. However, I think it's important that you understand why that equipment is there." David waited respectfully, sensing that Sterling was about to share something significant. The medical laboratory is used to transport biological samples for pediatric cancer research. I fund a private research initiative that develops experimental treatments for children with rare forms of cancer. The words hit David like a physical blow. Sterling's hidden medical equipment wasn't for personal luxury or business advantage. It was part of a program that might help children like Emma. "I don't publicize this work because I prefer to keep my philanthropic activities separate from my business operations. But given your daughter's situation, I thought you should know that the equipment you helped repair serves a purpose that might be relevant to her needs." David stared at Sterling, trying to reconcile this revelation with his assumptions about her character and motivations. The woman who denied his leave request was also funding medical research that could help sick children. "The experimental surgery your daughter needs," Sterling continued, consulting a file on her desk. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing her medical records through our company's insurance provider. The procedure she requires is still in clinical trials, but there's a research hospital in Boston that specializes in exactly her type of case." David felt the world shift around him. "How do you know about Emma's surgery?" "I make it my business to understand my employees' situations, especially when they affect company operations. Your daughter's condition is treatable, Mr. Chen, but not through conventional medical channels." She needs specialists who understand experimental procedures and have access to the latest research. Sterling pulled out another document and slid it across her desk. It was a letter of referral to the Children's Cancer Research Institute in Boston, signed by a doctor whose name David recognized from medical journals as one of the world's leading pediatric oncologists. Dr. Sarah Martinez runs the experimental surgery program at CCRI. I've spoken with her about your daughter's case, and she's agreed to evaluate Emma for inclusion in their current clinical trial. If Emma qualifies, all medical expenses will be covered by the research grant. David stared at the referral letter, hardly daring to believe what he was reading. The possibility that Emma could receive cutting-edge treatment at no cost seemed too good to be true. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Sterling was quiet for a moment, her professional composure showing cracks that revealed something more personal underneath. "Because I understand what it's like to watch a child suffer from a disease that conventional medicine can't cure. And because your technical skills saved my aircraft when no one else could. Which means the medical research that equipment supports can continue." As David left Sterling's office with the referral letter in his hand, he realized that everything he'd believed about his situation had been incomplete. The woman he'd seen as a heartless corporate executive was also someone who used her wealth and resources to help sick children. The aircraft repair that had seemed like a simple technical challenge was actually connected to medical research that might help his own daughter. Emma's surgery was scheduled for the following month at the Children's Cancer Research Institute, with Dr. Martinez personally overseeing the procedure. The experimental treatment offered hope that conventional surgery couldn't provide, and the research setting meant that Emma would receive the most advanced care available anywhere in the world. But perhaps more importantly, David had learned that sometimes the most powerful people carry the heaviest burdens, and that understanding someone's true motivations requires looking beyond surface appearances. Victoria Sterling had seemed cruel when she denied his leave request, but she'd been protecting something even more important, a medical research program that could help children like Emma survive diseases that would otherwise be fatal. The story was far from over, but David finally felt like he and Emma were moving toward a future filled with possibility rather than just fear and uncertainty. 3 months later, David stood in the observation deck of the Children's Cancer Research Institute, watching Emma laugh with other children in the recovery ward below. The experimental surgery had been a complete success, and Dr. Martinez had declared Emma's recovery nothing short of remarkable. The 8-year-old, who had once struggled to climb stairs, was now racing around the hospital corridors, her energy restored and her future bright with possibilities. But David's relationship with Victoria Sterling had evolved into something neither of them had expected. What had begun as a desperate employee seeking help for his sick daughter had transformed into a partnership that was changing both their lives in profound ways. The morning after Emma's successful surgery, David had received an unexpected phone call from Sterling's assistant, requesting a meeting at Pinnacle Aviation. When he arrived at her office, he found her reviewing detailed technical reports about aircraft electrical systems, but her expression suggested she had something more significant on her mind. "Mr. Chen," she had said without preamble, "I have a proposition for you. Your work on my Gulfstream demonstrated problem-solving abilities that are extremely rare in this industry. I'd like to offer you a position that would utilize those skills more effectively." David had listened as Sterling outlined a new role within Pinnacle Aviation, Chief Technical Innovation Officer, responsible for solving the most complex maintenance challenges across their entire fleet. The position came with a substantial salary increase, comprehensive health benefits that would ensure Emma's continued care, and the opportunity to work on technical problems that other specialists considered impossible. "There's one additional aspect to this position," Sterling had continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "The role would involve occasional travel to transport medical research materials using the specialized equipment in my aircraft. You would be responsible for maintaining and operating the mobile laboratory during these missions." David had accepted the position immediately, recognizing that it represented everything he'd ever wanted in his career: challenging technical work, financial security for his family, and the opportunity to contribute to medical research that could help other children like Emma. Now, 3 months into his new role, David had traveled to research hospitals across North America, transporting biological samples and experimental treatments that were helping advance pediatric cancer research. Each mission deepened his understanding of Sterling's hidden philanthropic work and his respect for her dedication to helping sick children. The mobile laboratory in Sterling's Gulfstream was far more sophisticated than David had initially realized. It contained equipment for maintaining cellular cultures, analyzing genetic samples, and preserving experimental compounds under precise environmental conditions. The setup represented millions of dollars in research technology, all dedicated to developing treatments for rare childhood cancers. Dr. Martinez had explained the broader scope of Sterling's research initiative during one of David's visits to the Boston facility. Victoria funds research programs at 12 different hospitals, she had said. Her mobile laboratory allows us to share resources and collaborate on treatments that would be impossible to develop independently. The transportation system you maintain has literally saved dozens of children's lives. David found himself thinking about Dr. Martinez's words as he watched Emma playing with her new friends in the hospital ward. His daughter's recovery was miraculous, but it was also part of a larger story about the power of innovative medical research and the importance of having resources available when conventional treatments failed. Emma had become something of a celebrity among the research staff at CCRI. Her positive attitude and rapid recovery had inspired other young patients, and she developed a particular friendship with Dr. Martinez, who often included Emma in discussions about the research process. At 9 years old, Emma was already talking about becoming a medical researcher herself, inspired by the people who had saved her life. "Daddy," Emma said as she joined David in the observation deck, her energy boundless despite having undergone major surgery just months earlier. "Dr. Martinez wants to show us something in her laboratory. She says it's connected to the work you do with Miss Sterling's airplane." David followed Emma through the hospital corridors to Dr. Martinez's research laboratory, a state-of-the-art facility filled with equipment that represented the cutting edge of medical technology. The doctor was waiting for them beside a sophisticated microscope setup, her expression excited in the way that scientists get when they're about to share a significant discovery. "Emma has been asking about the connection between your work and our research," Dr. Martinez said. "I thought you might both be interested in seeing exactly how the samples you transport are being used." She guided them to the microscope and adjusted the viewing angle so Emma could look through the eyepiece. "What you're seeing are cancer cells that we've been treating with an experimental compound that was developed using materials transported in Ms. Sterling's aircraft. The cells are dying, which means the treatment is working." Emma studied the microscopic image with the intense concentration she brought to everything that interested her. "They look different from normal cells," she observed, "more broken up and scattered." "That's exactly right," Dr. Martinez said, impressed by Emma's observation. "The treatment targets the specific genetic mutations that make these cancer cells different from healthy cells. Without the transportation system that your father maintains, we wouldn't be able to move these experimental compounds between research facilities quickly enough to keep them viable." David felt a surge of pride as he watched his daughter engage with complex scientific concepts. Emma's illness had introduced her to a world of medical research and technological innovation that most children never experienced, and she was clearly fascinated by the possibilities. "Miss Sterling never talks about this work," Emma said thoughtfully. "Why does she keep it secret?" Dr. Martinez glanced at David before responding. "Some people prefer to help others without seeking recognition for their generosity. Miss Sterling's research funding has helped develop treatments that have saved hundreds of children's lives, but she believes the work is more important than getting credit for supporting it." As they left the laboratory, David found himself reflecting on how dramatically his understanding of Victoria Sterling had changed over the past months. The woman he'd initially seen as a heartless corporate executive had revealed herself to be someone who used her wealth and resources in ways that created genuine positive impact in the world. But there were still aspects of Sterling's motivation that puzzled David. During their working relationship, he'd observed moments when her professional composure would slip, revealing hints of personal pain or loss that she kept carefully hidden. He suspected that her commitment to pediatric cancer research was driven by more than abstract philanthropy, but she'd never shared the personal experiences that motivated her work. The answer came unexpectedly during a routine maintenance flight to a research facility in Vancouver. David was conducting standard checks on the mobile laboratory's equipment when he noticed a small personal photograph tucked behind one of the monitoring devices. The picture showed a young girl, perhaps 6 years old, with dark hair and eyes that bore a striking resemblance to Sterling's. David was still staring at the photograph when Sterling entered the aircraft's cabin, She saw what he was looking at and stood very still for a moment, her professional mask slipping to reveal raw emotional pain. Her name was Sophie, Sterling said quietly, settling into one of the passenger seats. My daughter. She died 7 years ago from a rare form of leukemia that had no effective treatment. David carefully replaced the photograph and joined Sterling in the passenger area. He'd never seen her look vulnerable before, and he sensed that she was sharing something she rarely discussed with anyone. Sophie was diagnosed when she was 4, Sterling continued, her voice steady but filled with barely controlled emotion. We tried everything. Conventional treatments, experimental protocols, therapies that were still in development. Nothing worked. She died 2 days before her 7th birthday, and I realized that having all the money in the world means nothing if the medical knowledge doesn't exist to save your child. David felt his throat tighten as he thought about his own experience with Emma's illness and how close he'd come to losing her. That's why you started funding the research programs. Initially, yes. I wanted to ensure that other parents wouldn't have to watch their children die from diseases that should be treatable. But the work has grown beyond that. We're developing treatments for conditions that affect thousands of children, not just the rare cancers that took Sophie. Sterling stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the research facility where they just delivered experimental compounds that might help save other children's lives. Your daughter's recovery has been particularly meaningful to me. Emma's surgery succeeded because of research that Sophie's death helped inspire. In a way, she's living the life that Sophie should have had. David understood now why Sterling had been willing to help Emma when conventional medical channels had failed. The mobile laboratory, the research funding, the network of specialists, all of it was Sterling's way of ensuring that other children could have the future that her own daughter had been denied. Emma talks about becoming a medical researcher, David said. She wants to help other kids the way Dr. Martinez helped her. Sterling smiled, and for the first time since David had known her, the expression reached her eyes. Sophie used to say the same thing. She wanted to be a doctor who could fix kids who were sick like her. Maybe Emma can fulfill that dream for both of them. The conversation marked a turning point in David's relationship with Sterling. What had begun as an employer-employee dynamic had evolved into something more like a partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect. They were both parents who had faced the possibility of losing their children to serious illness, and that common experience created a bond that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances. Over the following months, David's work with Sterling's research initiative expanded significantly. He designed improvements to the mobile laboratory that increased its capacity and reliability. He developed new protocols for transporting particularly sensitive biological materials. He even began attending research conferences where he presented papers on the technical challenges of maintaining mobile laboratory facilities. Emma's recovery continued to exceed all expectations. Dr. Martinez declared her officially cured after extensive testing showed no trace of cancerous cells remaining in her system. The experimental treatment had not only eliminated her cancer, but had done so with minimal side effects, making her case a model for treating similar conditions in other children. But perhaps more importantly, Emma's experience had inspired her to pursue the scientific education that would allow her to contribute to medical research herself. She was accepted into a specialized program for gifted students interested in medical careers, and she threw herself into her studies with the same determination she'd shown during her recovery. I want to work with Dr. Martinez when I grow up, Emma told David one evening as they reviewed her homework together. I want to help develop treatments for kids who have the same kind of cancer I had. David smiled, thinking about Sterling's daughter Sophie and how proud she would have been to see Emma pursuing the dream they'd both shared. That sounds like a wonderful goal. Dr. Martinez says you have the kind of mind that's perfect for medical research. Emma's academic progress was remarkable, but David was equally proud of her emotional maturity and empathy for others. Her experience with serious illness had given her an understanding of suffering and recovery that made her unusually compassionate for someone her age. She volunteered at the Children's Hospital during school breaks, reading to younger patients and helping them understand their treatments. David's professional success had also exceeded his expectations. His work with Sterling's research initiative had established his reputation as one of the most innovative technical specialists in the aviation industry. He'd received job offers from major aerospace companies and invitations to speak at international conferences on aircraft maintenance and modification. But more than professional recognition, David valued the sense of purpose his work provided. Every time he maintained the mobile laboratory or transported research materials, he knew he was contributing to efforts that could save children's lives. The technical challenges were stimulating, but the human impact made the work deeply meaningful. Sterling had also changed during their months of working together. The grief and guilt she'd carried since Sophie's death seemed to have eased somewhat, replaced by a sense of purpose and hope that her daughter's memory was inspiring work that could help other children. She spoke more openly about Sophie now, sharing memories and talking about the kind of person her daughter might have become. Sophie would have loved Emma, Sterling told David during one of their flights to a research facility. They both have that combination of curiosity and determination that makes great scientists. I like to think they would have been friends if circumstances had been different. David nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of Sterling's observation. Emma's recovery represented the success that Sophie had been denied, but it also highlighted the tragedy of losing a child with so much potential. The work continued to expand as more research facilities joined Sterling's network. David found himself traveling regularly to hospitals and laboratories across North America, each trip contributing to research projects that were developing new treatments for childhood cancers. The mobile laboratory had proven so successful that Sterling was considering funding similar facilities for other research initiatives. But the most significant development came when Dr. Martinez approached David with a proposal that would change the direction of his career entirely. She wanted him to join the research team at CCRI as their Director of Technical Operations, responsible for developing and maintaining specialized equipment for experimental treatments. Your combination of technical expertise and understanding of medical research needs is extremely rare, Dr. Martinez explained during a meeting at the hospital. We need someone who can bridge the gap between engineering and medicine, someone who understands both the technical requirements and the human impact of our work. David was intrigued by the possibility, but he was also concerned about leaving his position with Sterling. Their working relationship had become deeply meaningful to both of them, and he didn't want to abandon the research transportation network they'd built together. Sterling's response surprised him. When he explained Dr. Martinez's offer, she immediately encouraged him to accept it. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity Sophie would have wanted for you," she said. "Your work with the mobile laboratory has been crucial, but your potential contribution to actual research development could be even more significant." She proposed a solution that would allow David to take the position at CCRI while maintaining his connection to the transportation network. Sterling would fund a new position at the hospital specifically designed around David's unique qualifications, and he would continue to oversee the mobile laboratory operations as part of his research responsibilities. The arrangement represented the best of both worlds. David would have the opportunity to contribute directly to medical research while continuing his work with the transportation system that had become so important to the broader research network. Emma would be able to continue her relationship with Dr. Martinez and the other researchers who had become like extended family to her. David accepted the position and began his new role at CCRI with characteristic enthusiasm and dedication. His first project involved designing specialized equipment for preserving experimental treatments during extended transport periods, building on his experience with the mobile laboratory to create even more sophisticated preservation systems. Emma was thrilled by her father's new position and the opportunity to spend more time at the research hospital. She began participating in junior researcher programs and shadowing graduate students who were working on projects related to pediatric cancer treatment. Her natural aptitude for scientific thinking and her personal experience with experimental treatments made her an unusually insightful participant in research discussions. "Emma has incredible instincts for this work," Dr. Martinez told David during one of their regular meetings. "She asks questions that experienced researchers sometimes miss, and she has an intuitive understanding of how treatments affect patients. I think she's going to make remarkable contributions to medical research when she's older." David felt profound satisfaction as he watched Emma flourish in the research environment. His daughter had not only survived her illness but had transformed it into motivation for helping other children facing similar challenges. The partnership between Sterling's funding, Dr. Martinez's research expertise, and David's technical innovations was creating opportunities that none of them could have achieved independently. Sterling remained actively involved in the research network, though her role had evolved as the program expanded. She'd established a formal foundation to manage her medical research funding, with professional staff to oversee grant administration and program evaluation. But she continued to participate personally in major decisions and maintained her commitment to supporting innovative treatments for childhood cancers. The success of Emma's treatment had become a model for similar cases, with Dr. Martinez publishing research papers that described the experimental protocol and its effectiveness. Emma had even co-authored one of the papers, describing her experience as a patient and providing insights that helped other families understand what to expect during experimental treatments. "Your daughter is becoming quite the celebrity in pediatric oncology circles," Sterling told David during one of their meetings at the Foundation offices. "Her case study has been cited in research papers around the world, and several other hospitals are using the treatment protocol that saved her life." David felt pride mixed with amazement as he considered how far they'd all come since that desperate evening when he'd been denied leave to care for his sick daughter. What had seemed like corporate cruelty had actually been the beginning of a journey that had saved Emma's life while contributing to medical research that could help thousands of other children. But perhaps most importantly, the experience had taught him that understanding people's true motivations requires looking beyond surface appearances, and that the most powerful partnerships often develop between people who initially seem to have nothing in common. Sterling's wealth and David's technical skills had combined with Dr. Martinez's research expertise to create something more valuable than any of them could have achieved alone. As David watched Emma working alongside graduate researchers in Dr. Martinez's laboratory, he realized that his daughter's illness had ultimately led to opportunities and experiences that would shape the rest of her life in positive ways. She was already planning her college education around preparation for medical research, and she spoke confidently about the contributions she wanted to make to pediatric cancer treatment. The partnership between David Sterling and Dr. Martinez continued to expand and evolve, but its core mission remained constant: developing treatments that could save children's lives and supporting families facing the devastating experience of childhood cancer. It was work that honored the memory of Sophie Sterling, while celebrating the recovery of Emma Chen and countless other children whose futures had been secured through innovative medical research. David's technical expertise had become an integral part of the research process, with his equipment designs and maintenance protocols ensuring that experimental treatments remained viable during transport and storage. His understanding of both engineering principles and medical requirements made him uniquely qualified to solve problems that traditional approaches couldn't address. Emma's involvement in the research program had also deepened, with her patient perspective providing insights that helped researchers understand how treatments affected children's daily lives and long-term development. She was already contributing to research protocols at an age when most children were still learning basic scientific concepts. Sterling's commitment to the work had become the defining aspect of her professional identity, with the Foundation's medical research funding representing her most significant legacy. She often spoke about Sophie during public presentations about the Foundation's work, explaining how personal loss had motivated her to support research that could prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. The story of their unlikely partnership had become an inspiration within the medical research community, demonstrating how personal connections and shared purpose could overcome initial differences and create lasting positive change. David's desperate need for help with his daughter's illness had led to discoveries and innovations that were benefiting children around the world. As David reflected on the journey that had brought them all together, he realized that the most valuable discoveries often came from unexpected places, and that the greatest successes frequently grew out of the most challenging circumstances. Emma's illness had seemed like an insurmountable crisis, but it had actually been the beginning of a new chapter that was more meaningful and impactful than anything he could have imagined. The work continued, driven by the knowledge that every breakthrough in treatment could mean the difference between life and death for a child somewhere in the world. It was responsibility that David, Sterling, and Dr. Martinez carried with deep seriousness and profound gratitude for the opportunity to make such a significant difference in the lives of families facing childhood cancer. 5 years had passed since David first discovered the hidden medical laboratory in Victoria Sterling's Gulfstream, and the world looked fundamentally different through his eyes. Emma, now 14, had become one of the youngest researchers ever accepted into the National Science Foundation's Advanced Study Program, her groundbreaking work on patient-centered treatment protocols earning recognition from medical institutions worldwide. The shy 8-year-old who had once struggled with a life-threatening illness had transformed into a confident young scientist whose insights were reshaping how doctors approached pediatric cancer care. David stood in the newly constructed David Chen Innovation Center at the Children's Cancer Research Institute, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as Emma led a group of medical students through a presentation on treatment adaptation techniques. The facility, funded by Sterling's Foundation and named in David's honor, represented the culmination of years of collaboration between engineering innovation and medical research. Its laboratories housed some of the most advanced equipment in the world, much of it designed by David specifically for pediatric cancer research applications. The center had become a model for integrating technical innovation with medical treatment, attracting researchers from around the globe who wanted to learn David's approach to solving complex biomedical engineering challenges. His reputation had grown far beyond the aviation industry, with major universities offering him faculty positions and technology companies seeking his expertise in developing medical devices. But David remained committed to the work that had grown out of his desperate attempt to help his sick daughter. The partnership between his technical expertise, Sterling's resources, and Dr. Martinez's research leadership had evolved into something much larger than any of them had originally envisioned. They were no longer just treating individual cases of childhood cancer. They were fundamentally changing how the medical community approached these diseases. Emma's presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause from the medical students, who clearly recognized that they were learning from someone whose unique perspective could significantly impact their future careers. She moved through the group, answering questions with the confidence of someone who had spent years thinking deeply about complex medical problems, her explanations demonstrating both technical sophistication and genuine empathy for patients facing similar challenges. "She's remarkable," Dr. Martinez said, joining David at the observation window. "Emma's ability to bridge the gap between patient experience and research methodology is unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of medical practice. The protocols she's developing are going to save thousands of lives." David felt the familiar surge of pride that came from watching his daughter exceed every expectation anyone had ever held for her. Emma's illness had initially seemed like a catastrophic setback, but it had actually provided her with insights and motivations that were driving innovations in pediatric cancer treatment. Her research focused on understanding how treatments affected children's daily lives and long-term development, perspectives that had been largely overlooked by traditional medical approaches. "The Stanford offer came through this morning," David said, referring to the full scholarship Emma had been offered for early admission to one of the world's most prestigious medical research programs. "She'll be able to start her doctoral work at 16 if she accepts." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Emma mentioned that she's conflicted about leaving the work here. She feels a strong connection to the research community we've built, and she's concerned about abandoning projects that could help current patients. David understood his daughter's dilemma. The research center had become like a second home to Emma, and the relationships she'd developed with patients, researchers, and staff represented some of the most meaningful connections in her life. But the Stanford opportunity would provide her with resources and exposure that could accelerate her research impact significantly. "What do you think she should do?" David asked, though he suspected Dr. Martinez's answer would reflect the same wisdom that had guided Emma's treatment years earlier. "I think she should follow her instincts," Dr. Martinez replied. "Emma has always known what was right for her, even when she was facing life-threatening illness as a child. If she feels strongly about continuing her work here, we should find ways to support that decision while still providing her with the intellectual challenges she needs." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma herself, who had finished with the medical students and was approaching them with the kind of excited expression that usually meant she had discovered something significant. At 14, she carried herself with the poise of someone much older, but her enthusiasm for scientific discovery remained charmingly youthful. "Dad, Dr. Martinez, I need to show you something," Emma said, gesturing toward the research laboratory where she'd been working on her latest project. "The analysis of the treatment adaptation data is complete, and the results are even better than we hoped." David and Dr. Martinez followed Emma through the bustling research center, noting how staff members of all ages treated her as a respected colleague rather than a gifted child. Emma's contributions to the center's work had earned genuine professional recognition, and her opinions on research directions carried significant weight in planning meetings. Emma's laboratory workspace was organized with the same meticulous attention to detail that David brought to his technical work. Computer screens displayed complex data analyses, while laboratory benches held carefully labeled samples and experimental apparatus. The setup represented years of accumulated research and Emma's growing expertise in biomedical data analysis. "Look at these survival rates," Emma said, pointing to a graph that showed treatment outcomes over a 5-year period. "The adaptive protocols we developed are producing cure rates that are 30% higher than conventional treatments, with significantly reduced side effects and shorter recovery times." David studied the data with amazement. The numbers represented more than statistical improvement. They represented hundreds of children who would survive illnesses that might otherwise have been fatal. Emma's work was literally saving lives on a scale that would have been impossible for him to imagine when she was first diagnosed. "This is extraordinary work, Emma," Dr. Martinez said, her voice carrying the respect of one researcher addressing another. "These results are going to change how we approach pediatric cancer treatment worldwide. Have you considered the implications for scaling these protocols to other medical centers?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with both of you. The Stanford program would give me access to computational resources that could help us develop implementation strategies for hospitals that don't have our specialized equipment. But I'm also concerned about leaving the patient advocacy aspects of the work unfinished." David realized that his daughter was facing the same kind of complex decision-making that had shaped his own career over the past years. The choice between immediate impact and long-term potential, between personal relationships and professional opportunities, between proven success and uncertain innovation. "What does your heart tell you?" David asked, using the same question that had guided his own decision to join Sterling's research initiative years earlier. Emma was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful in the way that reminded David of her mother. Sarah would have been incredibly proud of the young woman Emma had become, and David often wondered what advice she would have offered during moments like this. "I think I want to do both," Emma said finally. "Accept the Stanford program, but structure it as a collaborative project that allows me to maintain my work here while accessing their computational resources." Dr. Martinez, would the center be willing to establish a formal partnership that would let me continue my patient advocacy research while pursuing advanced studies? Dr. Martinez smiled. "Emma, that's exactly the kind of innovative thinking that makes you such a valuable researcher. I think we can definitely work out an arrangement that serves everyone's interests." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Victoria Sterling, who had driven over from the Foundation offices for a scheduled meeting about expanding the research center's programs. Sterling's relationship with both David and Emma had continued to deepen over the years, with Emma often serving as an unofficial advisor on patient experience issues for the Foundation's grant-making decisions. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," Sterling said as she joined them in Emma's laboratory. "Though given Emma's recent research results, I suspect everything happening here is important." Emma beamed at Sterling's recognition. Despite the significant difference in their ages and backgrounds, the two had developed a genuine friendship based on their shared commitment to helping sick children and their mutual understanding of loss and recovery. "Miss Sterling, I was just explaining to Dad and Dr. Martinez about the possibility of collaborating with Stanford while continuing my work here. Do you think the Foundation would be interested in supporting that kind of arrangement?" Sterling considered the question with the analytical approach she brought to all Foundation decisions. "Emma, your research is producing some of the most significant advances in pediatric cancer treatment that we've seen in decades. If Stanford collaboration could accelerate that work while maintaining your patient advocacy focus, the Foundation would absolutely support such an arrangement." David felt gratitude wash over him as he watched the three most important women in his professional life discuss opportunities for his daughter's future. Sterling's willingness to invest in Emma's education and research represented the same kind of visionary thinking that had originally motivated her support for experimental treatments. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with all of you," Sterling continued, her tone becoming more serious. "The Foundation has been approached by the World Health Organization about establishing international pediatric cancer research centers based on our model. They want to create a global network of facilities that combine technical innovation with patient-centered care." The implications of Sterling's announcement were staggering. The research approach they had developed in response to Emma's illness could potentially be implemented worldwide, helping children in countries where advanced cancer treatment was currently unavailable or inadequate. "What would that involve?" Dr. Martinez asked, her expression showing both excitement and concern about the complexity of such an undertaking. "Significant expansion of our current programs," Sterling replied. "Training international research teams, establishing equipment manufacturing partnerships, developing treatment protocols that can be adapted to different healthcare systems. It would be the largest pediatric cancer research initiative in history." David realized that Sterling was describing an opportunity that could fulfill the dreams that both Emma and Sophie had shared about helping sick children around the world. The mobile laboratory that had started as a solution to Emma's medical crisis could become the foundation for a global network of treatment centers. Emma's research would be crucial to the success of such a program, Sterling continued. Her work on treatment adaptation and patient advocacy provides exactly the kind of framework we'd need for implementing these programs in diverse cultural and economic contexts. Emma's eyes were bright with excitement, but David also saw the weight of responsibility settling on her young shoulders. At 14, she was being asked to help shape medical programs that could affect millions of children worldwide. "I'd love to be involved," Emma said carefully, "but I want to make sure I'm contributing meaningfully rather than just being included because of my personal story." Sterling smiled at Emma's thoughtful response. "Your personal story is certainly inspiring, but your research contributions are what make you valuable to this effort. The treatment protocols you've developed are saving lives, and your patient advocacy work is changing how doctors think about childhood cancer care." Over the following weeks, plans for the international expansion began to take shape. David found himself at the center of discussions about technical requirements for establishing research centers in locations ranging from rural hospitals in Africa to urban medical centers in Asia. His expertise in designing and maintaining sophisticated medical equipment under challenging conditions made him essential to the planning process. Emma threw herself into research that could support the international expansion, developing treatment adaptation protocols that could function effectively in hospitals with limited resources. Her work focused on creating flexible treatment approaches that could be modified based on available equipment and local medical expertise, while maintaining therapeutic effectiveness. The project represented a natural evolution of the partnership that had originally grown out of David's desperate attempt to help his sick daughter. What had begun as a personal crisis had developed into a collaboration that was addressing childhood cancer on a global scale. Dr. Martinez coordinated the medical aspects of the expansion, working with international health organizations to identify partner hospitals and establish training programs for local medical staff. Her reputation in pediatric oncology provided credibility that was essential for convincing government health ministries to support the new treatment centers. Sterling's foundation provided funding and administrative support, but more importantly, it offered the kind of sustained commitment that would be necessary for establishing lasting change in international healthcare systems. Her willingness to invest foundation resources in long-term projects rather than seeking immediate returns reflected the same visionary thinking that had originally motivated her support for experimental treatments. David's role in the international expansion leveraged all the technical expertise he had developed over years of maintaining and improving medical research equipment. He designed portable laboratory systems that could function reliably in locations with unreliable electrical power and limited technical support. His innovations made it possible to provide sophisticated cancer treatments in hospitals that had previously been unable to offer anything beyond basic palliative care. Emma's contributions to the project continued to exceed everyone's expectations. Her research on treatment adaptation provided the foundation for protocols that could be modified to work effectively in diverse healthcare environments. Her patient advocacy framework helped international medical teams understand how to provide emotional support alongside medical treatment, recognizing that healing involved more than just eliminating cancer cells. The first international treatment center opened in Nairobi, Kenya, 2 years after the initial planning discussions. David traveled there for the facility's inauguration, bringing Emma along so she could see firsthand how their research was being implemented in a completely different cultural and economic context. The Nairobi Center was smaller than the facility in Boston, but it contained the same essential elements: sophisticated diagnostic equipment, specialized treatment capabilities, and a patient-centered approach that recognized the emotional and social aspects of childhood cancer care. Local medical staff had been trained in the treatment protocols that Emma had developed, and early results showed that children in Kenya were achieving survival rates comparable to those in advanced medical centers in the United States. "This is incredible," Emma said as they toured the Nairobi facility. "These doctors are using the same treatment approaches that saved my life to help children who would never have had access to advanced cancer care." David felt profound satisfaction as he watched Emma interact with young patients in the Nairobi Center. His daughter's illness had motivated innovations that were now helping children on the other side of the world, proving that personal tragedy could sometimes be transformed into global healing. The success of the Nairobi Center led to rapid expansion of the international program. Within 3 years, similar facilities were operating in 12 countries, with plans for additional centers in regions where childhood cancer mortality remained unacceptably high. Each new facility incorporated lessons learned from previous implementations, creating a network of centers that shared knowledge and resources while adapting to local conditions. Emma's role in the international program continued to expand as she moved through her collaborative Stanford program. Her doctoral research focused on developing treatment protocols that could be effective across different healthcare systems, and her publications were becoming standard references for pediatric oncologists working in resource-limited settings. David's technical innovations had become essential components of the international network, with his portable laboratory designs being manufactured and distributed to partner hospitals worldwide. His reputation in biomedical engineering had grown to the point where major universities were competing to recruit him for faculty positions, but he remained committed to the work that had grown out of his daughter's illness. Sterling's foundation had evolved into one of the world's largest supporters of pediatric cancer research, with programs operating on 6 continents. Her commitment to the work had become the defining aspect of her legacy, transforming her from a successful business executive into a global leader in medical philanthropy. The partnership between David, Emma, Sterling, and Dr. Martinez had demonstrated that personal connections and shared purpose could create changes that extended far beyond what any of them could have achieved independently. What had begun as a desperate father's attempt to help his sick daughter had evolved into a global movement that was saving thousands of children's lives annually. As David stood in the original research center, now bustling with international visitors and researchers from around the world, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. Emma's illness had initially seemed like an insurmountable crisis, but it had actually been the catalyst for innovations and collaborations that were transforming pediatric cancer care worldwide. Emma, now 18 and completing her doctoral studies, had become recognized as one of the world's leading experts on patient-centered cancer treatment. Her research continued to drive improvements in survival rates and quality of life for children facing serious illnesses. Her personal experience with cancer had provided her with insights that were impossible to gain through conventional medical training. The story of their unlikely partnership had become legendary within the medical research community, inspiring other collaborations between technical experts, medical professionals, and philanthropic supporters. David's desperate need for help with his daughter's illness had led to discoveries and innovations that were benefiting children in countries he had never imagined visiting. As David watched Emma leading a video conference with researchers from treatment centers around the world, he realized that his daughter had not only survived her illness, but had transformed it into a mission that was saving lives on a global scale. The 8-year-old who had once asked him why some airplanes were broken had grown into a young woman who was fixing the broken aspects of pediatric healthcare systems worldwide. Sterling's vision of honoring her daughter Sophie's memory through medical research had been fulfilled beyond her wildest dreams. The treatment centers operating in Sophie's name were providing hope to families facing the same devastating diagnosis that had taken Sterling's daughter years earlier. Dr. Martinez's commitment to advancing pediatric cancer treatment had resulted in the development of protocols that were being used in hospitals around the world, with survival rates that would have been considered impossible when Emma was first diagnosed. The work continued, driven by the knowledge that every breakthrough in treatment could mean the difference between life and death for children facing cancer diagnoses. It was a responsibility that David, Emma, Sterling, and Dr. Martinez carried with deep seriousness and profound gratitude for the opportunity to create lasting positive change in the world. David's journey from a desperate father seeking help for his sick daughter to a globally recognized innovator in biomedical engineering demonstrated that the most significant achievements often grew out of the most challenging personal circumstances. The partnership that had saved Emma's life had evolved into a movement that was saving thousands of lives annually, proving that individual determination combined with collaborative expertise could address even the most complex global challenges. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.